take no credit for my father, and I prefer not to take any blame for my son. One of the problems in a lot of technical fields is that you have terms that sound self-explanatory. So if I say something is a public good, and you're not an economist, you will think you know what I mean. And you'll be wrong, because public goods are not actually goods that are produced publicly. It's a technical term in economics, which we'll probably come back to at some point in this talk. Similarly, I think the world is full of people who believe that they understand the theory of relativity, except for the mathematical details. Because, right, the theory of relativity says everything's relative. I understand that. And the particular term I want to talk about today is market failure. Because market failure sounds self-explanatory. It sounds as though it's about markets and about their failing. But in fact, while it is about a kind of failure, it's not particularly about markets. And what I want to do is to try to explain what market failure is, why it is legitimately used by people we disagree with as an argument against laissez-faire, but why I think it is an even stronger argument against the alternatives to laissez-faire. That is to say, I want to argue market failure is a way in which human arrangements work less well than we would like, but it is more of a problem for political than for market failures. And I will start with my favorite simple example of market failure. I want you to imagine that it's about 1,000 years ago, and probably a few thousand miles east of here across the ocean, and you are one of a line of several thousand men with spears on foot, and your spears are all pointing that way. And the reason your spears are all pointing that way is there are a few thousand other men on horseback, and they have spears too, and they're coming this way. And you do a very quick cost-benefit calculation. And you say to yourself, if all of us stand and plant our spears and hold our position, if we're lucky, we can break their charge. And if we break their charge, some of us will die, but most of us will live. On the other hand, if we run away, horses run faster than we do, so I ought to stand. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I said we. I don't control him and him. If everybody else stands and I run, the chance of our breaking the charge is only very, very slightly reduced because I'm one man out of 5,000. On the other hand, I won't be one of the ones who gets killed. If everyone else runs and I stand, I am dog meat. Whatever they are going to do, I am better off running. Everybody makes this calculation, all of us run and most of us die. Welcome to the dark side of rationality. That's what market failure is. Market failure is those situations where individual rational behavior doesn't lead to group rational behavior. In the extreme case where everybody takes the action that is in his rational self-interest and everybody is worse off than they had taken a different example. A more modern and somewhat less dramatic example is one that I got to observe daily for a long period of time when I was teaching at UCLA. Because just south of the UCLA campus, there is what they like to claim, or then liked to claim, was the busiest intersection in the world. It was Westwood and Wilshire, I think. Two enormous, like 10-lane streets, not super highways, ordinary streets intersecting. And what do you observe there? You observe that as the light goes red this way, the last few cars try to get across, and they end up filling up the intersection. And then the light, gradually, they dribble out just in time so the cars coming this way can fill up the intersection this way and block it before that light goes red. All right? If everybody was politely refrained from going into the intersection unless they could get across, everybody would get home sooner. But anybody who acts that way is making a mistake. Because when I politely refrain from going into the intersection unless I'm sure I can get across, I reduce the chance that I'll make it across, and all the benefit goes to these people who are going the other direction. They're the ones I'm not blocking. So that's another sort of modern world example of market failure, where each driver is doing the right thing in terms of his own calculation of his rational self-interest, and yet every one of them is worse off than if they all behave differently. Lots of other examples. Many of you are familiar with the idea of a prisoner's dilemma. I won't run through it. since it's one of the few ones of these things people have often heard of, but a prisoner's dilemma is simply a two-person version of market failure, where each prisoner correctly calculates he's better off confessing, even though both of them would be better off if they kept their mouths shut. Another familiar example is burning coal in your fireplace in London in the 1890s. They had very bad fogs, partly due to the smoke from burning coal. It may well be, I don't know, that they would all have been better off using some different fuel, but each individual correctly believes that his burning coal only contributes a tiny bit to the fog and is the cheapest available way of staying warm. Those are all examples of market failure. It's worth noting that whether you get market failure sometimes depends on the rules of the game. That if that intersection had an arrangement whereby once the light went red, any car in the intersection was confiscated or trashed or blown up or something, then people's rational incentives would have changed, and indeed, assuming nobody made any mistakes and actually got blown up, they would all have been better off. My favorite example of the point that different rules will sometimes change a market failure into a market success is a story of the two Bedouins in Arabia. This is the camel race story. Probably none of you have heard, maybe a few of you have. Two Bedouins are riding their camels through the desert of Arabia with the oasis 3 miles away. And one of them starts talking, and he starts saying, you know, this camel of mine is the slowest beast in all the deserts of Arabia. You've never seen such a terrible camel. I should never have bought it. And the other one says, you think your camel is slow? Let me tell you about this camel that I'm riding. And they get into an argument about who has the slowest camel. And they finally agree on a bet, that whichever Bedouin's camel reaches the oasis last will win the bet, demonstrating he's slower, and the other one will have to pay him a golden dinar. Well, if you think about the logic of that situation, you can see what happens. One of them rides his camel slowly, and the other rides his camel more slowly because he wants to win the bet, and the other one more slowly still. And an hour later, there are two Bedouins sitting stock still on the camels in the blazing sun in the middle of the desert of Arabia with the oasis 2 miles away. And at this point, a wise man comes by in the desert. And he looks up at the two Bedouins and says, why are you two idiots sitting your camels stock still in the blazing sun in the middle of the desert? And the two Bedouins get off their camels to explain to him what's going on. And he thinks for just a moment, and then he says 2 words to them. And they jump on the camels and race off for the oasis as fast as ever they can. Somebody who hasn't heard it before, what are the 2 words?
Switch camels?
Switch camels. Right? The bet was on which camel got to the oasis last. And if I'm riding his camel and he's riding mine, now our incentives have just reversed, and now I want to go as fast as possible, not as slow as possible. So it's an elegant example of the fact that one set of rules give you market failure, each one's acting rationally with bad results, a different one gives you market success. And that's an important point. You can't always avoid market failure. I'm not going to argue you can. I don't believe that free markets or anything else always give you the right result. But you want to think about whether you can avoid it. If you're creating a political system, writing laws, organizing a firm, organizing the division of labor within a marriage, dealing with your kids, there are all sorts of contexts where saying to yourself, given the rules that we've got, what will be the result of people acting rationally? Do I like that result? Is useful, and you can sometimes figure out ways of changing how things are organized such that what previously was market failure now is. What does this have to do with political issues? Economists normally assume that individuals act rationally. Indeed, I would have said that the definition of economics, at least for me, is that approach to understanding behavior that starts from the assumption that individuals have objectives and that they tend to choose the correct way of achieving those objectives, which is what economists mean by rationality. If you assume people are rational, it's natural, especially for a libertarian, or a libertarian doesn't think too much about it, to say, well, that solves all the problems. We're all rational, we all do the right thing will happen. And economists say, no, that's not true. Look, here are situations where you're stuck in a market failure situation where the fact that everyone is rational doesn't give you the right thing. It results in our all being killed when the attacking men with spears on horses ride us down.